like to call the Saline City Council meeting to order. If you'd please rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we dive into tonight's agenda, I would like to begin this evening with a moment of silence. Earlier today, myself, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, Councilmember Gearbaugh, Police Chief Radzik, State Representative Brayback, and Ms. Georgia Frost from Congresswoman Dingell's office attended a memorial service at Linden Square Assisted Living Facility for Amber Jo Thomas. Ms. Thomas is the deceased victim of last week's heinous shooting event, which occurred in the city's northeast quadrant, specifically Woodland and North Maple Road. My colleagues and I grieve at the loss of life and express condolences to all those physically and emotionally scarred by last week's events. I will have a more comprehensive statement to share at the conclusion of tonight's meeting, but now please join us in a moment of silence honoring the life of Amber Jo Thomas. Thank you very much. Roll call this evening. Members present are Council Members Camara Sulak, CO, Del Orco, Gearbaugh, Rice, Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, and Mayor Morrow. From City staff, we have the City Clerk, Community Development Director, City Treasurer, and Police Chief Radzik. The rest of you who are in the audience this evening, we welcome you and we encourage you to sign in the back to my left. You can also find hearing devices and copies of the agenda on the back table. At this time, the Chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as submitted unless there are amendments.
So moved.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon to approve as submitted, ma'am?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Camara Sulak. All those in favor of approving the agenda as submitted signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. There are no absences this evening, so we'll proceed to the first public comment period. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments on agenda items? The record will reflect there are none unless the clerk indicates that she received a written comment in advance of tonight's meeting. No? Easy enough. Then we proceed to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, would you like to move the consent agenda as amended, noting that you would like removed agenda item 23-175, turn the town teal?
Yes.
Very good. Is there a second to approve the consent agenda as amended?
Yes.
Moved by Gearbaugh. Hearing no additional discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. And agenda item 23-175 will now appear as the first item under new business. We proceed now to unfinished business. Agenda item 23-120, ordinance number 856, to define, permit, and regulate accessory dwelling units, ADUs. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from Community Development Director Harrington and to approve or not to approve ordinance number 856, an ordinance to define, permit, and regulate accessory dwelling units, ADUs.
To acknowledge and approve.
Moved by CO to acknowledge and approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Del Orco. Mr. Harrington, Community Development Director Harrington, this is an issue that has been vetted, re-vetted, and then vetted a third time. So I would welcome some brief obligatory comments from you, and then if our reps from Code Review and Planning would like to share some additional remarks, we will welcome that before we open it up for discussion.
Yes, absolutely. So the reason it went back to Planning Commission was because of a height allowance for detached accessory structures. So for the public's benefit, an accessory structure is something that is not your house, whether that be a shed, garage, a pergola. In some cases, if you built a patio out of your ground, it could be considered an accessory structure. So there was a height provision that allowed all detached accessory structures in the city, regardless of zoning district, to be 24 feet in height or the height of the house, whichever is less. The Planning Commission reviewed that one specific line at their last regularly scheduled meeting, and they decided that, like the accessory dwelling unit allowance, it would only be allowed to build a detached accessory structure of that height only in the R2 district. So to go over the fundamental mechanics of the ordinance very briefly, accessory dwelling units are proposed to be allowed by right in the R2, the two-family district, for homes that are currently not a duplex. So if it's a single-family resident, you can exercise your allotment to have a secondary unit on that site in the form of an accessory dwelling unit. Usually in a detached structure, accessory dwelling units can also utilize bonus rooms or attics or even basements if they're finished. They're fully separate living quarters. They have lockable doors to prevent outside intrusion. They usually have amenities like in-unit laundry or dishwashers. But fundamentally, it's meant to be a separate dwelling unit used by a party unrelated to the immediate family, whether that be a grandmother, a mother-in-law, or even to rent them out commercially. If they are rented out commercially, as a caveat, they are covered by our rental inspection ordinance, so we will be maintaining and watching these units if they're being rented commercially. Accessory dwelling units will be able to use existing sewer and water connections for the homes. They will not be required to use their own unless the property owner specifically requests it or the engineer requires it. This is an identical regulation to the city of Dexter and Ann Arbor, who both have accessory dwelling units allowances in their codes. And then additionally and lastly, having an accessory dwelling unit on a property will require the property owner to show that they can park at least one additional car on their lot. So they have to have 2 per dwelling unit, so they need to have at least 3 parking spots on their lot in order to be allowed or afforded an accessory dwelling unit. So those are kind of the specifics. There are square footage limits that mirror that of our accessory structures already. And I'd be happy to answer any further questions or clarify any further issues.
Very good. Before we open it up for discussion, let me first defer to Councilmember Del Orco, who is the liaison to the Code Review Committee, which prepared the initial draft of this ordinance. Mr. Del Orco, do you have any additional comments at this time?
Nothing substantive that I haven't stated previously. I'm glad to see this come through. I'm glad that Planning Commission had a chance to have a second crack at it and iron out any concerns that they had, and I'm going to be moving in favor of the motion, obviously. I seconded it.
Very good. And Mr. Gearbaugh, as was mentioned earlier, this item was discussed and ultimately approved by a unanimous vote. I think there was one absence at the most recent Planning Commission. Is there anything you'd like to add, any perspective you'd like to add as the council rep to the city's Planning Commission?
Yeah, I just want to thank Mr. Harrington for this review. When it came back to planning, they did all agree that they had not noticed the height and the issue with that being outside of the R1, out of the R2 district. Even Mr. Beardsley, who was on the code review, admitted that they had understood that it was only going to be in the R2 district. And so as a result, we now have it clarified that the height concern is only for ADUs in an R2 and not necessarily all auxiliary buildings throughout the city. So that got clarified, and we'll continue with what our current code is unless at some point in time the city considers wanting to have ADUs expand outside of the R2 area. With that, the only other question that did come up was one of the things was when we mentioned having separate water and sewer issues, there was a concern about how the water meter, if it would be required, and that might be a consideration that we want to look at, because that does mean that that additional ADU will then be contributing towards the cost of supporting water infrastructure and the sewer infrastructure.
Very good. I'll open it up for a brief period of questions, noting that, of course, that this issue has been on council's agenda for the past probably 2.5 to 3 months. So if you do have any outstanding questions, I would entertain them at this time. Otherwise, we will open it up for debate. Let me start with Councilmember Khmer-Sulak.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Code Review taking another look at it, and Mr. Harrington. I think it's clear now, and we can all understand it better. Can you clarify? So the ADU is required to be at least a smaller by at least 1 square foot than the main dwelling?
Okay, so yeah, there's 2 separate things. So there's the size requirement, which is the same as accessory structure size requirements elsewhere. So we've left those unchanged. So by design, it will inherently be smaller than the house because we have square footage caps based on the size of the lot. As for the height in the R2 district, under no circumstances can it be taller than the house.
Right.
So it can be 24 feet in height or the height of the house, whichever is less. I think more often than not, we're going to see folks going underneath that height requirement simply because building a detached structure from your home to plumb it, to electrify it, everything else is already an incredibly expensive process. Mm-hmm. So I'm skeptical that we'll see a lot of folks really exercising that whole height allotment unless it's an existing non-conforming structure like some of the carriage houses that have remained in our community for the better part of 150 years. So.
Okay. And Mr. Gearbaugh touched on the water and sewer. So when we know of an ADU, is that going to count as another residential unit or a factor since it's sharing?
Right, so they don't have to provide their own tap into the sewer and
Right.
water mains. So currently, the ordinance is written as they can go about it in a number of ways, but our building inspectors would likely require them to put in a second meter so that they know how much they're charging, especially if that property is going to be readdressed, which it might evidently have to be if it's a residence. So
Okay.
it would probably be like 125.5 East Henry, for example.
Right.
As an example, I don't know if that address actually exists, so apologies if I outed anybody, but
But that's not a requirement.
it is not a requirement necessarily. So I think there's ready-to-serve fees that we talked about that would potentially be missed. Similarly, though, on a multi-tenant property, if they share water, which some of ours do, and they don't have individual meters, it's the same concept there, that we might be losing out on an aspect of a fee that we could be charging.
Okay, great.
But this is something that we can establish through policy as well as the city, that we will require ADUs. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the specific ordinance language. It would require us to go back and reevaluate the ordinance itself, I believe, because I don't think you can make a de facto amendment to an ordinance as the final voting body for it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Kamara-Sulek. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you. Obviously, the water and sewer was a big concern, and I appreciate I've spoken to Mr. Harrington and to Ms. Cole about that earlier today, in ensuring that we are doing ready-to-serve charges on accessory dwellings, because I think that's the only fair way to our current users is when new users are added, they need to be paying that same fee. I don't want to see it a pass-through with one set of meters. So whatever way we need to establish that, I think it's important. And I do appreciate that you also talked about, because this was something else we talked about, was understanding when you have an ADU, how that impacts police, fire in finding those addresses, and how we establish that. Do we give those new addresses so then they actually now have a plot? And so my train of thought was putting in water and sewer lines directly now, because you're sort of separating them out already by giving them an address. So why would we not want to incur having the water and sewer lines put to them? I know there is an upfront cost, obviously, but it is something that I would really like us to look at the benefits to, because what I don't want to have happen is in years to come, we say, oh, well, we should have done that, and now we have all of these people that have shared lines, but we're trying to separate the properties and such.
So I guess there's a couple of things there. So I would start by saying we have a number of parcels in our community that have multiple addresses scattered throughout. So all of our multifamily properties, for example, Thorncrest is split over 2 parcels, but there are multiple addresses on those parcels. Same thing with our shopping centers. So it's from all tax intents and purposes. Mr. CO had a question in a previous meeting about subdivision. They can't subdivide it, but they can have 2 addresses on the same taxable piece of land. As for the separate connections, that was something that we talked about at the code review level. It was talked about even at the planning level. It's what Ann Arbor originally stated, that you had to have separate sewer and water connections, but they're incredibly expensive. It's not a small upfront cost of $500. It's a small upfront cost of $10,000. So there was a definite interest in terms of making these actually viable, practically speaking, they would have to be it. And then lastly, I would add that fundamentally, it is an accessory dwelling unit. It's not a standalone. It has to be an accessory to a primary dwelling unit. That's not meant to be separated or subdivided off. It wouldn't meet our lot standards if it was separated or subdivided off, even if we have our lot standards. I don't foresee a path forward for a lot of these things to become their own standalone taxable parcels. And if at that point they did, then they would be required already by our code to establish a separate sewer and water connection.
And so just understanding the footprint aspect, because now we're doing away with the term garage, and so it's any kind of building structure such. So does this encompass, if you have a chicken coop or a giant play structure or anything like that, does that count towards your secondary building? Or how does that work?
Right, so you're allotted one accessory building over 200 square feet, and then you're allotted another one under 200 square feet. So depending on how the coop is constructed or what it's constructed out of, it might not necessarily meet our definition of an accessory structure, particularly if it doesn't have a roof. Although our code would require it, people don't always put roofs on their coops. So that would be one instance. And then, but primarily looking at it, it was meant to allow for accessory dwellings and not just using the word garage. So primarily, we're still going to see people having garages, primarily seeing people have garages as their larger detached accessory structure. I'm sorry, there's a lot of terms going on here, so that would be my hypothesis. But yes, it would allow for a larger pergola or a larger shed. You don't necessarily have to use it to park your car in, essentially.
Okay, and then so sort of piggybacking off of that concept, so you have a pool with a deck or a patio that's not actually attached to your house. Are we factoring those pieces in too? I mean, so I guess what is the
Right,
threshold?
I'm sorry. So a structure per our code is an object with a roof, or it's a really archaic term. We need to fix that area of our code altogether to establish a standard that's going to cover the patios and the decks, because those have impervious impacts on our lots. So there's something that Saline doesn't have called an impervious surface ordinance, which in addition to our regulation on lot coverage, which is based off those structures with roofs, then you would also count in all the hard area that water is not permeating through to arrive where it's supposed to theoretically arrive to. So that is another standard. I've already been in contact with OHM as part of their engineering review standards updates to really get us what should our impervious surface limit be. I don't see that as necessarily intertwined with this, but there are spillover effects for sure.
Okay, because that actually was where I was leading to next. So when we get into that idea, so now if we approve this now, can we tack on these things of these extra requirements, our impervious surface, because they are going to go hand in hand in the process. So are we going to approve this and then everybody that's already approved doesn't have to follow the new standard?
So I would say we already have a large amount of existing non-conforming properties with whatever impervious surface standard we established, because people have been paving their backyards in Saline for 30 years, and our industrial properties too. I mean, you'll see that it's a sea of pavement at the end of the day. And at this point, we can't do anything about it except have them remove some of the pavement to allow the stormwater to land where it needs to land. But in terms of this, because an accessory building or an accessory structure is defined as a structure, and we've written it in such a way, it counts towards what limits of coverage that we already have. So they are limited, or all homeowners are limited to 30% lot coverage, which is all structures on their property. So marginally, maybe there could be an exception of someone who gets through with a non-conforming, but I don't think it's likely at this time, especially because we're limiting it to the R2 district.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. The only other thing that I was going to ask you about is that sort of went hand in hand to this that we've talked about in the past is the rental aspect, the Airbnb piece of what kind of controls we are going to put over that. And if we are going to put controls over that with these ADUs.
Yeah, so I've been working with our city attorney, Tony Chubb, to create an ordinance for short-term rentals at the direction of the city council. He has a relatively standard one he's like to apply in other communities. I checked Airbnb before this meeting because I knew this question was going to come up. We have 5 rentals in our community right now. 2 of them are rooms, so there are 3 homes and 2 rooms. One of the things is downtown, one is in a new build in Maple Cove. So that is to say, it's not super common. I don't think it's our most pressing issue, but absolutely, we would not allow ADUs. And when we do perform a short-term rental ordinance, we will explicitly prohibit them from being ADUs, because I think there's obvious reasons. We're trying to create new housing for our community, not have it sucked up by a rental market, a short-term rental market, excuse me.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Delorco, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand everything that was incorporated into the revised version after the second Planning Commission review. I certainly appreciate the extra layers of restrictions around how to provide for this in an appropriate way and limiting it to the R2 for the time being. However, if it's successful and it moves forward into other areas of the city, will we be able to then amend from where we are now to allow for higher structures at that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's section 503, accessory building and structures, under 2B, detached buildings and structures. So it originally was written and all residential districts to detached accessory structures. So it's now changed to, in the R2 district, 1 taller detached accessory structure per residential lot is permitted and shall not exceed 24 feet in height or the height of the principal structure on the same lot, whichever is less. 1 additional detached accessory structure in the R2 district is allowed and shall not exceed 14 feet in height.
Okay. So
essentially, we would just scrap the R2 aspect of it, and then right below that is 3, which is our other ordinance. So we would just collapse them into each other.
Okay, makes sense. All right. And then as far as second addresses and second meters, there will be from the genesis of which this was created was part of the impetus behind it was to allow for parents and in-laws to age in place, so on and so forth. So with that, in that situation, if it's just an extension of the same family, would it still necessitate a second meter and a second address, or could you tap into the share the service and share the meter with the primary residence?
Right, so I think this is an administrative policy we're going to have to clarify as a staff. And I think that the challenge with that is exactly that. How are we going to really know if it's somebody is, unless they hadn't, that they would be renting it illegally if they claimed it was their grandmother or whatever, and then they rented it to somebody who, so I think there's going to be a point of clarification in administrative policy that needs to be set on that exact issue.
Okay. And that's forthcoming?
Yes.
Okay.
It will have to be, essentially.
Yeah, all right. I appreciate it, that's it.
Any additional questions or discussion on the motion? Let me just say, and I articulated very similar remarks at our most recent Planning Commission meeting. I appreciate everyone's work on this, Planning Commission, the Code Review Committee. More importantly, Mr. Harrington, our Community Development Director, has devoted countless hours to crafting this ordinance. I think it is a solid proposal that is before us and takes steps, important steps, in the direction of creating more affordable and diverse housing options in our community. So I will be casting a very emphatic vote in the affirmative. Are there any additional comments from the dais this evening? If not, we'll proceed to vote. It's been properly moved by CO, seconded by Del Orco, to acknowledge and to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business, item 23-175, Turn the Town Teal. This will be a motion to approve the request for volunteers to put up teal-colored ribbons downtown to bring awareness of ovarian cancer.
Move to approve?
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Dillon to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamara Sulak. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The only reason that I pulled this off is that this is something that comes before us yearly, and I think that there's an opportunity to create a policy surrounding putting up ribbons in town of where they can go, when they can go, how they apply for it, and such, just so that it doesn't look like there's favoritism to a specific group, and just so that those groups understand what the policy is, what the expectation is. So that was the only reason that I had asked to have this removed, is so that we could start a dialogue and look to creating a policy.
Very good. And as we discussed prior to tonight's meeting, I know you'll follow up with City Manager O'Toole and provide some of those insights, and I think we can get working on developing a policy similar to what you just expressed.
Thank you.
Any additional remarks this evening on this particular item? There appear to be none. It's been properly moved by Dillon, seconded by Kamara Sulak to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move to the second new business item, which is 23-177, 7641 North Ann Arbor 425 agreement. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from City Manager O'Toole and to approve or not to approve the 425 conditional land transfer agreement with Lodi Township for 6741 North Ann Arbor Street, and to authorize, not authorize, the city clerk to file.
Move to acknowledge receipt?
Moved by Gearbaugh to acknowledge receipt. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dillon. City Treasurer Cole, in City Manager O'Toole's absence, is there anything that you'd like to say for the public record regarding this issue?
I believe that all the materials supplied have completed the application for the 425. Councilmember Dillon did point out an error that it is pointed to an exhibit, and it points to Exhibit A on page 1, and it should be pointing to Exhibit B because that is who lists the owner.
Okay, so that change will be made without objection. And we do have the petitioners here as well. Are there questions from the dais? Again, we just have a motion to acknowledge receipt at this juncture. Mr. Seal.
Two, thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Cole, the value of the property will be allowed to go up or down as per our assessor,
Correct.
not in accordance with anything through Lodi Township.
My understanding is that it would be with our assessor. However, I can follow up and get back with you on that to confirm.
Okay, the other one is, it says here that we'll share .9278 mils with Lodi. Is that, and that's allowed to vary according to their tax rate, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, but we'll still charge the going city tax rate and just extract that portion of the tax and send it on to Lodi.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. CEO, Councilmember CEO, if you recall from a previous email that was sent by the city manager's office, the revenue sharing is a extremely nominal dollar amount per year.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
I agree with that. I just wanted to make sure that we were still able to have our assessor
Yep.
move the value up and down. Thank you, Your Honor.
Additional questions from the dais? Would the petitioner care to make any comment this evening? We have both the Bowies and Mr. Rode from Quantum Signal.
Other than we appreciate.
Peter, would you mind coming to the microphone? Because we do have to, we do want to make sure everyone can hear you, and we do record for posterity's sake.
We greatly appreciate how helpful the city has been. It's been an interesting study in municipal accessibility and public service when we contrast the treatment and the amount of input we got from the city of Saline as opposed to the township of Lodi. We're thrilled to have it go through. We've always thought of Otto/Saline Picture Frame as part of the city of Saline, and we're glad to make it official.
Definitely. Yeah. You've got an excellent buyer, and we want to take this opportunity to congratulate you, your wife and sister on a retirement and a phenomenal career as small business owners and operators in the Saline community. Appreciate everything you've done.
Thank you.
There's a motion on the floor at the moment to simply acknowledge receipt. That was moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Is there a motion now to approve or not to approve?
Approve,
Okay, move to approve and authorize, Mr. Gearboss?
with the correction as stated.
Yep. Modification will be made to the memo without objection. Mr. Seal, were you the second on that?
Yes, Your Honor.
Very good. Is there any additional discussion on the motion? There is none. All those in favor of approving and authorizing signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. Congratulations. Thank you for your attendance this evening. We move on to new business item 23-178, Deputy Chief Employment Agreement. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the memo from Police Chief Radzik and to approve or not to approve the employment contract for Deputy Chief with Andrew Hartwig effective August 7th, 2023.
Move to acknowledge and approve.
Moved by CO to acknowledge and to approve. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Seconded by Kamara Sulek. I'll get you on the next one, Mr. Delorco. Chief Radzik, would you like to come to the podium and, for the public's benefit, briefly go over your memo? Or comment on your memo, rather?
So as noted in the memo, the deputy chief position has remained vacant since October 2022. To continue continuity of services to the community and operationally, the deputy chief position should not remain vacant. Filling the vacant deputy chief position is critical for the well-being of the Saline Police Department and the city in which it serves. Unfortunately, the incident that happened on Thursday, August 3rd, is a prime example of having two chaotic scenes, and I couldn't be at both of them. And it carries more weight, obviously, when you have a deputy chief working with other police agencies to help delegate responsibilities and coordinate the scene. Not only that, the same goes for the day-to-day oversight of operations. And in addition, this will open up a position for another promotional process within the ranks of the Saline Police Department.
Very good. Are there questions or comments from the dais for the chief or for the employee in question, current Sergeant Hartwig? Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
Thank you. So I think you just hit upon where my question is starting to go, which is this will obviously leave a hole in our sergeant, which understanding, so will we only then have one sergeant and until that second sergeant is filled, and then now will the deputy be covering a shift so that we have sergeants for each shift?
We'll have one sergeant remaining. However, for scheduling purposes, until we can run a promotional process, which but our goal is by the end of the year to run that process. The deputy chief position will, 2 days a week, be that help out on road patrol duties on the day shift where we would have a hole in shortage.
But that will not be a part of the union?
No,
Okay, thank you.
nope.
Additional questions for the chief? No? Oh, please, Councilmember Seal.
Just having been in that position myself a number of years ago, I know how important it is for somebody to share in the administrative duties in the running of the police department. And I wholeheartedly support this, and I am extremely proud to see Officer Hartwig move up, having known his father for many years at the Ann Arbor Police Department.
I agree.
Very good. Sergeant Hartwig, would you care to make a statement for the record this evening? Sure. Thank you, Chief.
Well, I very much appreciate the opportunity. It's, as you all know, been a long week at the police department with the tragedies that our officers and dispatchers, that they go through that a little bit themselves responding to these things. And I'm just glad to be part of the management team that's going to give them the logistics and everything they need to move forward and respond not only to these kinds of tragedies, but to the everyday things that we do in this city. And just thank you very much for that opportunity. I'm proud to move into that position.
Very good. Thank you, Sergeant Hartwig.
All right, thank you.
Any additional comments or questions before we proceed to vote? Easy enough. We have a motion on the floor then moved by CO, seconded by Camara Sulak to acknowledge and to approve the employment contract. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. The motion carries unanimously. Congratulations, Deputy Chief Hartwig. We transition now to the final action item of the evening, which is new business item 23-179, ordinance number 857, revised sign code. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt from the memo from Community Development Director Harrington and to acknowledge the first reading of ordinance number 856, a revised sign code. Mr. Harrington, if you'd like to briefly comment, and then for the public's edification, if you could make mention, if this, this motion is simply to acknowledge receipt and to acknowledge receipt, it will subsequently come back for formal consideration at our next regular meeting in August?
That is correct.
Very good. Okay. Please make a brief comment on your memo, and then I'll defer to Councilmember Gearbaugh, who's the liaison to the Planning Commission, because this item was also discussed at last Wednesday's Planning Commission meeting. Or maybe it was 2 Wednesdays ago. Doesn't matter. Their most recent meeting.
Clerk Royal.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
I'll move to acknowledge.
Okay, Gearbaugh moved to acknowledge. Is there a second?
I'll
Second.
Seconded by, I'll let Dylan be the mover on that. I'll get you next time, Mr. CO. Apologize, Clerk Royal. Don't know how I missed that. Mr. Harrington.
Right, so the sign code itself is about 26 pages long. My memo is 5, so it's kind of hard to condense at the end of the day. I apologize. So fundamentally, the city adopted a sign code last summer in July, written by our previous city council. Unfortunately, there were a variety of errors in it. The goal of that update was to remove content-based language. So in the town of Gilbert versus, I don't remember the name of the suing party, the Supreme Court essentially decided in 2015 that you can't have content restrictions on signs, full stop, period. It doesn't matter if it's a permanent sign or a temporary sign. You cannot tell people what the content of that sign could be. For the longest time, our temporary sign code had content restrictions. If it was used for a garage sale, displaying content of a garage sale, it had a different standard than if it was used for a community event, which had a different standard if it was used for something else. There are very limited exceptions, such as real estate signs or construction activity, where you're really allowed to deviate from that content neutrality model. So they removed all the content restrictions last year, but instead of establishing a single standard, they kind of left these varying standards, and without some sort of content guide, it became really impossible for us to enforce, because I don't know when this circumstance you could have a 20-square-foot sign is versus 5 3-square-foot signs. So the primary crux of this update was to really just fix our temporary sign code standards and create something that is fair, that is neutral, and that is actually enforceable. So that was the primary lift, is all due to our temporary signs. It's one of the smaller sections of the larger sign code. However, things like building signs and ground signs in terms of what they're allowed to be, so signs affixed to buildings like how that Saline emblem is affixed to the wall versus a ground sign, which would be a monument you'd see outside of a shopping center. So if we pretend this TV was a sign, the sizes of those have remained pretty much identical to what they were. The one exception is that Saline allowed up to 200 square feet for shopping center signs, which is grossly over what Ann Arbor, Pittsfield, and Dexter allow, which is all under 100 square feet. So we're taking baby steps, and we reduced it from 200 square feet to 15 square feet, and from 20 feet in height to 15 feet in height as a max. For ground signs specifically. So it was a minor reduction. We might create some nonconformities out of it, but those are the kind of nonconformities we want. We want to create a more unified aesthetic standard for our community that's not the promulgation of signs. So I don't imagine very much pushback there. There were some other minor changes made here and there to allow for more flux. I'd be happy to answer any questions. They're all outlined in my memo of what those are, and I also tried to include very specific definitions, as well as some terms to know in there. So if I can answer any of your questions, please let me know. I know it's a rather large thing to wrap your hands around. There's PowerPoints that have sizes of signs. I can do whatever you need me to do. So just let me know, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Well, and I would also note, Mr. Harrington, for the record, this is council's first bite at the apple. So they
Yes.
have 2 weeks to address any questions or concerns to your office before we vote on final approval on August the 21st. Councilmember Gearbaugh, do you want to add any perspective as the liaison to the Planning Commission?
Sure. There was at least, didn't we have about 3 reviews of this at planning? So we've taken a good stab at it a number of times, and really what came up to be the biggest concerns were temporary signs, the number of temporary signs. There were a number of concerns with large campaign signs and things that were a concern last year, which were being addressed. We talked about electronic signs, mostly ones that would face residential areas and such. A recommendation that we not go that route because of the concerns that could be disruptive to the opposite property of those type of situations. We also looked at off-site versus on-site. Concerns with that being the ability for nonprofit organizations or churches or things to be able to advertise their events. If we were to restrict that, there could be a concern that they wouldn't be able to do what they currently do. It's a risk you have to balance between whether you want to allow it or not allow it, and hopefully there's other ways, especially with the limitation of the number of signs that you can put on a property right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Harrington, that'll help address those concerns and issues in the future.
Right. I believe that within the bounds of what the Supreme Court has decided municipalities can regulate, I think that this is a pretty good sign code that reflects both our community's best planning standards and as well as the input of specific planning commissioners that really, had specific, ideals that they would like reflected in our sign code, which is, this is a great time for us to set aesthetic standards as a city. This is a document where we're given that deference to kind of decide what does the look of Saline, what is the look of Saline.
And then we agreed that it's not what the content or freedom of speech issues and concerns, those continue to be those things that are done, but there are some limitations that, campaign signs can stay up only so often after the election, and some of those things that would become more of a nuisance and an eyesore than what would be really what we want to have seen as a community. And then the other couple of things that I brought up were banner signs, preferably vertical banners. We've seen an explosion of those, and they've become concerns in terms of sight and distance and ability to look around corners and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll be able to control those by height, although there were recommendations that we ban those. But I think we're more concerned that that could be too overstretching. So at this point, it's up to the council what else they would like to review.
Very good. And just to clarify, because I think campaign signs, especially with election season upon us, are coming incredibly closer. So the rules for campaign signs and election signs, we don't define those terms because it's not in our own interest to define the content of something, is essentially how this all works out. So during election season, for residential properties, how the code is currently written, you're allowed up to 4 additional signs on your property that have to follow the sizing standards of our signs, but they can say whatever they want. And then after that election is over, you have to remove 4 of those signs, but you're still free to keep 4 on your property that can say essentially whatever you want, provided that it doesn't, it's not, unprotected speech and it's not deliberately harmful or a slur or aggressive language. Even then, it would be something we'd have to invoke legal counsel for. And the same thing is true for commercial properties. During 60 days prior to an election and up to 5 days after, you're allotted more signs for your property. They can't necessarily be bigger than what could currently be there. But again, we're not controlling that content. So if you use that election allotment to just add more signs to your property that advertise your business, once again, we are content neutral. It does not matter if you choose to advertise a political candidate or your business or something else fun going on in the community. You're just allowed more signs. We're not regulating the content. So I just want to make that very clear.
Appreciate that clarification. Again, this is your first bite at the apple. Are there any initial questions for Community Development Director Harrington? Mr. Seal, and then I'll jump to Mayor Pro Tem Dillon.
Thank you. Mr. Harrington, I read through the ordinance, proposed ordinance, a number of times, and I still have a question. At Christmas time especially, it's become the vogue now to have these lighted signs that broadcast a scene up on the face of a house, and frequently the scenery moves in a circle or revolves around or whatever. Where does that fit in this ordinance?
Technically, it would be prohibited. The reason being is that it's an animated sign, and in theory, it's distracting or harmful to your neighbors. You're emitting more light, you're shining light. So our goal is to prohibit things from moving, especially. So animated signs tend to be incredibly dangerous because when you're driving, going, 10 miles over the speed limit, like many people do on Michigan Ave, if you're going down and a gas station has a bunch of bubbles going by, you're going to naturally look at it. And that's our concern with animated signs, especially in residential areas, is that people aren't paying attention to the road. They're not watching for children. They're not watching for parked cars or vehicles. So in theory, it is technically prohibited. Now, are we going out there during daylight hours, actively looking for people who are, using projecting signs on the roofs? No, but if your neighbor complains about it, you are in violation of a code, and that's absolutely something that we would be required to enforce because it does present a safety issue, and it might seem like a minor one, but it really is a safety issue.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Dillon.
Thank you. Mr. Harrington indulged me earlier and answered a lot of my questions that I had, but I wanted to sort of touch base on them. Mr. Gearbaugh had mentioned about vertical banners, also called sails or feather signs and such, and we've talked about whether we should not allow them, whether we should, whether they should have a height adjustment to them. And what I mentioned to him was, because that was the initial discussion was, well, we'll restrict it by height. They do make shorter ones. And so if the idea is that we don't want those, then we need to say we don't want them and not have it tied to a specific size. The other piece that I want to make mention of, because what I think we're seeing with our sign issues is that signs cannot be placed in the lawn extensions. They have to be on your property. That seems to be an ongoing issue right now. But there are a lot of things that I want to make sure that as we're doing this, we're addressing issues that we want to see resolved. And so that, because sometimes we'll just say, okay, we're going to create this plan, but it doesn't specifically address the problem we have. And I think that's where we end up with enforcement issues of, well, we thought we were solving this problem. So I just want to make sure we're very clear in this as to what we're doing. And there are certain things like window signage that need to be addressed. And whether it's a portion of the window, each window pane, or the totality of the windows for that business and such, and whether they're see-through, whether they're advertising for a different business and such. I want to make sure that when we do this, we do it correctly so that we can enforce it. Because I do feel like there are some issues right now that just sort of fall into that very gray area. Banners that are tied to fencing and, having banners that are tattered, and how do we address that aspect of them? And then I know that one of the big issues that we've had is signage that's on property that's really not monitored. And by way of example, everybody knows the corner, the Dairy Queen corner. And last election cycle, there were literally 200 signs on that one corner. And so I know what you're saying about, okay, we're going to limit the number of signs, but then does that fall onto your office to call that property owner and say, hey, by the way, there's 18 signs on your property?
Yes, and surprisingly, it's a better way of doing it than how it had been previously done. So previously, the city would claim or had permitted temporary signs. So people would bring in their sack of signs to City Hall, there was a binder, and staff would individually sticker the signs to note that they had been approved, and then we give them back. And supposedly on some agreement that the city had with CVS or the operators of CVS, as well as Key Bank, there was an agreement that the city would monitor and allow the placement of signs on those properties, which I don't have any relationship with CVS, so I am not comfortable approving signage as speech to be placed on somebody else's property that's not our own. By pushing the onus on the property owner to figure out what speech do we want to express, if any, it gets the city out of that altogether. And if they violate our sign standard, if people trespass and place their signs on that property, that's not really my business from the zoning administrator perspective. I'll call the property and say, you're exercising too much signage, you can't do that, you have to figure out what you want here, if you chose to place any of it at all, and then it becomes a them problem to deal with. And we can go through the regular code enforcement process, which is much simpler than, kind of mediating through who said they could have it there in the first place. So there's no easy way to do it. People are inevitably going to break aspects of our code. We have to go about enforcement. So there's no way to avoid the enforcement end of this, but this makes enforcement a lot easier. And it was crafted with the knowledge of I actually have to go out and enforce this myself in order to write it. So.
Okay, because what I'm concerned about is that, okay, they've got 10 signs there, they're allowed 6. And we've told CVS, hey, by the way, you're over the, so then do we have to pull signs? And then how do you choose which signs get pulled?
I would absolutely not touch anybody's sign on their property.
Well,
we would cite them. So we would go through
cite the business. Okay.
Right.
I just want to be clear because I don't want to see us looking favoritism of, oh, well, we're going to keep election signs, but we're going to remove internet signs, or vice versa.
No, not at all. Or not at all. My desire or goal
Okay.
in life is to remove other. There have been 2 times where I've removed other people's signs, and I did not enjoy doing it then, and they were not under great. Both times we were solicited by a property owner who was incapable of removing it themselves to remove a sign that was illegally placed on their property. So we had to do that twice last year. Like I said, even then, it was not my favorite thing to do, but I have no interest in choosing or deciding. It is not my passion or desire to be sign police, so.
No, that's fine. So the other one that we've talked about is V signs. Usually those are the realtor signs. And if that's something that we should allow, not allow, in my view, it's sort of like somebody's getting 2 bites of an apple in the way that they're positioning their signs. I mean, they can have a front and back, so just making it one way versus a V. I just want to make sure that we're understanding how we're allowing the signs to be.
So under the temporary sign standard, as it was proposed to you in this ordinance, there's 2 things. So there's one that says this is the size of any single sign. It can be 16 square feet in most of our commercial districts. However, if it has a backside, you're now at 32 square feet of total signage on your property, and you are maxed out. The same thing with a V sign is if they pitch it at a V, and this is 16, and this is 16, it's still technically considered 2 signs. It is and it isn't. It's a front and back, just in an interesting way. But that would, once again, also cap you. But you can't do 16, 16, and then the opposite side of the V have a message as well, because I would say you're over your total sign allotment.
So I appreciate that. And then I'll yield the floor to others. Just one last question. Is there any differentiating? Does MDOT have any standards, signage standard requirements that would differ from ours for, going through, on Michigan Avenue?
Potentially, I would have to ask or inquire more with MDOT on their own specific standards that would usurp ours. Usually speaking, MDOT is not active in terms of sign enforcement, to my understanding, considering most of the signs that are illegally placed in our city are in the right-of-way that belongs to both us and MDOT. So I know they're not active in doing it. But yes, I can check with MDOT too. It would be in addition to whatever standards we have.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Additional questions, Mr. Gearbaugh?
I just want to clarify, the one thing too is with temporary signs, we now have a
Mr. Delorco, please.
I just, Ben, before this went to Planning Commission, I believe you prepared a PowerPoint, or someone did, someone on staff, talking about various elements of the ordinance. One of them is the issue of electronic message boards and the code review's suggestion to limit those to text only and prohibit animation. It says in your PowerPoint that you're waiting for legal feedback on the issue. Is there a challenge to that position?
No, sorry, that was a while ago. So we went on this 3 times, so I just shared 2 relevant PowerPoints that were included. So yeah, essentially we asked, based on code review, could you prohibit images? Our attorney said probably not a great idea unless you prohibit images for everybody. So ultimately it became a non-issue because the Planning Commission decided that at this time we're not going to be moving forward with electronic message boards in residential districts, regardless of the user. So.
Okay, great. I missed that point of the ordinance somehow.
Well, it wasn't in the ordinance.
There it is. Okay, very good. Thank you for clarifying that.
Absolutely.
Just one.
Yep, one last question before we vote.
Thank you. The other question that I spoke to Mr. Harrington about was that when we talk about residential and you're allowed currently, it's allowed 4 signs with an additional 4 during election season. 8 signs I feel as though could be excessive on a property because it's not based on the size of the property, correct? So, I mean, should we consider reducing the 4 all the time signs down to more of a 2, and then you can add 4 during election season and such? I just don't want every household to look like a sign farm, and so I just want to kind of understand what that's going to look like.
Yeah, so that's actually technically the existing standard that was brought over from what was adopted last July. So I would say if you haven't noticed anything in the last year, it probably will remain the same because it's been the standard for about a year. However, it is within your discretion to limit the amount of signs. Now, based on the square footage of a lot, I'd have to check with our attorney on that because I could see a conflation with buying speech essentially for having a bigger piece of land. So, but like I said, I can check with our attorney on the limiting of it, on limiting it based on lot size, but I think we have the absolute ability to limit it regularly. So we could just drop the whole thing down to 2 if that was the council's wish.
And just to clarify, I'm not implying that we should set it in regard to lot size. I'm just saying that if you had a small lot and you had 8 signs on it, it could look overwhelming to your neighbors.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Councilmember Rice.
Related to Mayor Pro Tem Dillon's question. So HOA rules will overrule city ordinances, correct? Is it?
Yes, absolutely. Every day of the week. It's a private deed agreement.
I just want to make that point to the public that there are still HOAs rules involved and that will potentially, hold them back from being able to put signs on the residence.
Okay, please direct any additional questions or comments to Mr. Harrington over this next 2-week period, and be prepared to vote on the ordinance either in its totality or by offering amendments or modifications on August the 21st. This time we have a motion on the floor moved by Gearboss, seconded by Dillon to acknowledge and to acknowledge. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move on to reports and announcements. I'll start to my left and into my right. Councilmember Rice, any reports or announcements?
Just from the Historic District Commission, we will have a new member, but we are anticipating losing a member soon, so we're still actively recruiting for members of the Historic District Commission. And Parks Commission received many nominations for the Green Thumb Award, and so we will be choosing that awardee next month, and then we'll have a presentation in October at a council meeting.
Very good. Councilmember Del Orco, any reports or announcements?
None at this time.
Councilmember Gearbaugh?
Just a couple, as from Planning Commission, but master plan meeting will occur on Wednesday at
7 p.m.
o'clock, 7 p.m.
Right in here.
We want everybody that can to attend so that we can get additional information and input on it before we start beginning to finalize the plan and shipping it out to all the other local governmental agencies. I also want to invite everyone to the Rentschler Farm yard sale. This is the big weekend when we have the US 12 yard sale throughout the different counties in this area. That will be on Friday and Saturday from 9 to 5. We do still have a couple spots, so if you're looking to sell a bunch of stuff, give me a ring. And we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.
Very good. Mayor Pro Tem Dillon, any reports or announcements? Excuse me.
Thank you. The Zoning Board of Appeals has not met because we have not had any applications. The Cable Commission continues to meet monthly, and we are actually looking at a couple of new purchases. I think you've heard us discuss that we're looking at some new microphones for in here, specifically for the podium, that are a little bit more accessible to people of differing heights. So we're looking forward to that, and also some microphones and speakers that we can use outside for events. Also, I did have an opportunity to attend the opening for the Trinity Health new facility that is at the corner of Moon, State, and Michigan Avenue. It is a remarkable facility that will offer urgent care, primary care, and they've moved their physical therapy out there. And if you have not had an opportunity to look at it, it does, although it's not within the city limits, it does provide access to health care in the immediate area.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Any reports or announcements?
Nothing at this time. Rick.
Councilmember Kamara Sulak?
The DEI committee meets on Wednesday, but the Jazz in the Park that was on July 22nd was a great success. I don't know, I think at least several of us were there. There's a a radio station. It was a beautiful evening. The quality of the musicians, the music, the sound system was excellent. The attendance far exceeded the committee's expectations. And I think all the food trucks and the Kona Ice did really well. And I think this is going to be a great event and a great annual event. So if you weren't there, keep your eye out for next year. And that's all I've got.
Yeah, let me echo those comments, and I believe that the Saline Post actually reached out to me for a comment on Jazz in the Park. I thought that was a phenomenal event, and I hope it does become part of our annual calendar of community events and initiatives. I think it's a wonderful project for the Arts and Culture Committee to continue to spearhead. I think there's some modest modifications and improvements that can be made to that event, but I thought it was really exceptional, and I think the group and the volunteers did a phenomenal job pulling that off and organizing an event of that magnitude in a very short period of time. So kudos to all who were involved. I did get a reminder from Councilmember Gearbaugh to encourage our friends, neighbors, and residents to attend Summerfest, which is this Friday and Saturday. More information can be found online and on the Summerfest Picnic in the Parks website. Now, as referenced at the top of tonight's meeting, I have a statement prepared in conjunction with the Saline Police Department that I would like to read. On Thursday, August the 3rd, 2023, at approximately 11:25 a.m., communication operator Lisa Bain received numerous calls regarding an active shooter at Linden Square Assisted Living Facility. Saline officers responded on the scene and quickly determined that there were two victims, with gunshot wounds in the parking lot of the former UAW hall located at 601 Woodland Drive East in Saline. The suspect, later identified as Barry Garza, had fled the scene in a four-door Ford Focus. Washtenaw County Sheriff Deputy Dave Sexton observed the suspect's vehicle on South Ann Arbor Street, just north of Willis Road. He also noticed that Mr. Garza had intentionally crashed his four-door Focus into an innocent victim's vehicle. A Good Samaritan, who will later be identified and, will later be recognized and honored, then put his vehicle in front of Mr. Garza's to prevent him from fleeing yet again. Deputy Sexton confronted the suspect, who was uncooperative, but was ultimately apprehended by the deputy after being tased. As you can likely imagine, this was an intense and chaotic event with two separate crime scenes. The beginning of the incident to the apprehension of the suspect all occurred within the time span of approximately 12 minutes. The swift apprehension and coordination of the crime scenes, processing of evidence, and work to finalize the case, thus ensuring justice for all of our victims, would not have been possible without the teamwork and collaboration of all of the governmental units, agencies involved. Our local detective, Bill Stanford, has conducted interviews, handled evidence, processed evidence, and coordinated the arraignment, and has been in contact with the victim's family. He continues to complete search warrants and has been instrumental in putting the case together. Barry Garza was arraigned on Saturday, August the 5th, 2023, on open murder, assault with the intent to murder, and felony firearm. Jessica Blanche from the Washtenaw County Prosecutor's Office is handling the case. Mr. Garza has no bond. On behalf of the City of Saline and the Saline Police Department, we would like to extend our gratitude to the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office, Pittsfield Township Police Department, Ann Arbor Police Department, Michigan State Police, University of Michigan Department of Public Safety, Milan Police Department, Saline Area Fire Department, Huron Valley Ambulance, ATF, and the FBI for their support and continued assistance in this investigation. Unfortunately, the events of last week have made it abundantly clear. Saline is no longer immune from these types of tragedies. It is imperative that elected and appointed officials remain vigilant. Those of us in leadership positions must work to ensure that appropriate policies and protocols are in place to help manage emergency situations in the future. It must be said, the events of August the 3rd were handled in a very professional and dignified manner. Emergency personnel were deployed effectively, the crime scenes were secure, and information was shared to our residents in a timely and respectful manner. To ensure that this remains standard protocol, the Saline Police Department, city staff, and other community stakeholders will meet to debrief on the events of August the 3rd, with a focus on ensuring procedures are carefully scrutinized and vetted, thus allowing for effective response during active shooter events or any public safety emergencies which may impact the broader Saline community. Again, we convey our deepest sympathies to the family and loved ones of Amber Jo Thomas. We also grieve for all those experiencing pain and loss. Please know that you will remain in our thoughts and prayers in the weeks and months ahead. To conclude, if any member of the community has questions or information they'd like to share regarding this ongoing murder investigation, they are encouraged to contact the Saline Police Department directly. The Saline PD is located at 100 North Harris Street in Saline, and the non-emergency telephone line is 734-429-7911. Thank you very much. If there's no additional comments from the dais, at this time the chair would transition to the second public comment period. Under the Open Meetings Act, any person may come forward at this time and make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested, but not required, to state his or her name and address for the record. You may simply come to the podium if you'd like to speak. You'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mary Hess. It's been a couple years that I've been concerned about islands not being entered into the city of Saline as far as the tax base. And I welcome, of course, the new addition tonight. But I think that when a property, an island, gets Saline City water and sewer, they have street lights, and they have their snow removal, they should join as far as taxpayers of the Saline City taxes. You had talked about it, I think, last year or a couple months ago, that we have a second property that is thinking about coming in. And the 425, which is a share of our taxes, I don't understand, because I would like to welcome them. And with our new water and sewer, I think everybody ought to be able to share. Years ago, or before they raised the last water rates, the people that were not in the city receiving water and sewer, they had double water and sewer rates. So that would have been double what the city residents our taxpayers were given. And then, of course, when our water rates went up, there was decided we couldn't do that. That would be too much money to raise them up twice. So they lucked out, and I'm just wondering when the council is going to consider going to the Boundary Commission to bring these islands in, or the properties that have water and sewer, city water and sewer, and are not helping pay for the improvements of or welcome to the city. Thank you.
Are there any additional citizen comments? You have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Chang Ming Fan, local entrepreneur, local social entrepreneur. I have 3 things to share with everybody. Thank you so much, Council Mayor. And especially first, I want to say thank you, Mr. Dean Gerbach, sorry. Great job and wonderful work, and especially your team. And the Farm the Museum is one important spot, and it's an icon. So many people work so hard. And I hope that is coming, 180 miles garage sale along Michigan Avenue. And then before that, the job can finish, which is modeling the building. And second part I want to say is I had the honor to participate the tour and the work meeting at the local facilities, and Mr. Mayor lead a team, and Saline have wonderful team and workers to help us. The infrastructure, the everything is the hard work and also based on this wonderful equipment. And that is something which is Saline people should know. Saline is a great city. Not only we have the good policy to get back to where it has been, a charm, beautiful, safe city, and smells better, if I can say smells good. Wonderful work. And third thing I want to say is that very, very important, not to this body, this council, the people of Saline, the Saline area schools. This is important about the open AI initiatives, ChatGPT. Do I have 30 seconds?
You have 56 seconds.
Then I can talk a little more. And this is so important to our humanity. You all know the movie Frankenstein, all of these, I think that's a movie. Now it's come true. The intelligence, artificial intelligence, is so common, so quick, so powerful. We the people, especially local people, will be in this gigantic, financial-driven fight. Intelligent, artificial intelligence, ChatGPT is not just the only tool. BART, New Bing, and all others, the big companies using this, their position, big money, generate a lot of profit, and meantime, a lot of advantages. So let's work together and win this war against the artificial intelligence occupation. Thank you.
Thank you, Changmin. Are there any additional citizen comments?
Good afternoon, Mayor Marl, members of the City Council. Sorry, I have allergies, pardon me. My name is Libby Williams. I'm the creator and co-administrator for this social media group, Saline Unsalted for All. Our group was created out of a need for direct rebuttal to a hate-filled group that has been bullying members of the community for months, most notably School Board Trustee Susan Eastep. I would like to share with you our proposed city resolution against hate and extremism. Whereas the diversity in our community is beneficial to us all, making us stronger and more resilient. And whereas the City of Saline wishes to renew its commitment to creating a more diverse and inclusive community, including within city institutions, schools, and neighborhoods. And whereas the City of Saline wishes to affirm its commitment to the safety and well-being of its entire community and ensure the rights will be respected and their freedoms protected. And whereas the City of Saline supports the peaceful exercise of free speech, free assembly, and freedom of and from religion for all people. And whereas the City of Saline is committed to ending the spread of hate, bigotry, and harassment based on race, ethnicity, color, gender identity or gender expression, sexual orientation, age, body type, veteran status, disability, or any other protected characteristic. Therefore, be it resolved, the City of Saline denounces all forms of targeted violence in written, verbal, and physical form, including the spread of misinformation and in using online forums that are rooted in sexism, racism, xenomesia, homomesia, transmesia, or any other targeted forms of hate. This is a cause we feel extremely passionate about and is rooted in personal experience for us all. Saline Unsalted for All hopes the council will consider a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Any additional citizen comments this evening? Looks like we got a couple. You'll have 3 minutes once you reach the podium.
Good evening, City Council, Mayor Marl. I'm Joe Rukowski. I emailed you guys about 2 weeks ago with a big concern about our downtown, where it feels like we have empty storefronts. We're replacing restaurants with mortgage bankers and you know, stuff that doesn't bring business to downtown Saline. My daughter's going to a dance camp in Dexter. I drive through that at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday, and it's booming. There's people everywhere. There's plenty of restaurants. There's a lot going on, and I wonder what City Council's doing to fill vacant restaurants or vacant buildings with business that brings people to Saline. We live at 210 North Harris. We're 3 houses down. Got a 6 and a 4-year-old. I don't want to travel to Dexter. I don't want to travel to Ann Arbor to go out to eat, but I have to because we have 3 Mexican restaurants in town, no Italian. Like, I'm not saying you got to have an Italian restaurant. I'm saying just what are we doing to bring diversified restaurants, businesses to the downtown area? It seems like when we moved here 5 years ago, and we lived in Milan before, we belonged to St. Andrew's Catholic Church, we got married there. You know, we always wanted to move to Saline because it was small town America. But it seems like we've gone kind of backwards in the last 5 years to where we're losing businesses. And I understand, to your guys' point, I appreciate Mayor Gerbach, Councilwoman Dillon, Mayor Marl, you guys responding to my email. It's not always up to you guys, right? Sometimes businesses just fail, and I understand that. But I'm just curious what we're doing to not be stagnant. Are we falling behind? Are we just staying where we were? Are we trying to move forward, kind of a thing? The second thing I want to touch on, and I spoke to Councilmember Gerbach and Mayor Marl maybe 2 years ago about some contractor oversight on some work that gets done in town. South Harrison Henry 2 years ago had a piece of sidewalk, or their ADA, the level landing, was removed in 3 pieces. They put it back in 3 pieces, but I'm not visually impaired, so I can see it, right? Somebody that's visually impaired would trip over it. It was 4 inches above what it should have been. You guys took great action, took care of it. Now I'm looking at, right in front of Max there, we have a piece of sidewalk. How long has that been out? It's filled with stone. We have a piece in front of Brecken Park, filled with stone. Who oversees the contractors that come in here? My company that I work for has done work in Saline. We did part of the Michigan Avenue, Ann Arbor, Saline, the autonomous vehicle stuff. We replaced our sidewalks when we were in there. We replaced a planter that, you know, we may have damaged. Trying to understand why other contractors aren't held to the same standard that MDOT would, the county would. Who oversees that, I guess, would be my question. So, thank you for your time. I appreciate looking forward to you. I'll reach out to you, Mayor Morrow, for some other comments.
Thank you. Perfect timing. Oh, let me change this real quick, Ben. Go ahead.
Hi, Ben Goodman. I'm with Saline Area Schools. I'm here just to talk about Stuff the Bus. It's on Friday. It's the official kickoff for Summerfest. For those who don't know what Stuff the Bus is, Paul Heineck, myself, and a bunch of students, as well as Ashley Harmon and House from Community Ed, we collect school supplies for kids in the Saline area that cannot afford to buy school supplies. So every student will walk into school on August 28th with a book bag full of school supplies to get the year started off good. We're going to be hitting all the neighborhoods in the Saline area, as well as Holy Faith Church, St. Andrew's Catholic Church, Brood Awakenings, and Steadfast Chiropractic. If you would like to donate supplies, you can drop them off at Liberty or any of those businesses. We really want to make sure we stuff this bus this year so every kid can start off school with a nice set of book bag, school supplies, so they can learn from day one. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you for that. Any additional citizen comments? Yes, please.
Yes, Tran Longmore, 325 North Lewis. When we talk about believing in free speech, but then we talk about getting rid of disinformation. I want you 7 people up here, before you consider anything like that, to imagine the 7 people in town you'd least like to take your seats, and then have them decide what disinformation is. And that's why we have free speech in America. So be careful, tread lightly when you start considering any sort of resolutions that tell you to clamp down on free speech. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any additional citizen comments this evening? Well, let me say a few things. I'm sorry. Brian, my apologies. I missed you there.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. Real quick question. My wife and I are residents of Saline. We live about 4 blocks from this building. Just wondered if you could update us on the paving of Clark Street.
Very good. We can certainly do that. One last call for citizen comments. Let me try to run through some of these, and we appreciate everyone's comments this evening. Libby, we, of course, look forward to meeting with you and your colleagues to discuss the proposed resolution in its totality, I think a week from this Thursday. The questions about business attraction and retention are ones that I'm deeply passionate about. As a matter of fact, it's very serendipitous. I had probably a half-hour to 45-minute call with Tran Longmore last week, Monday, talking about that very issue, because we have several things coming up. One, later this week, we will launch a marketing economic development video that was produced by Ben Goodman at SETN, which is long, but it's substantive and talks about the virtues of doing business in Saline and highlights some of our most iconic businesses. We would encourage everybody, not just just those on council, but those in the public to help us disseminate it. We also have a small business forum coming up later this month, co-hosted by Saline Main Street. Mr. Goodman's office and mine are also sending packets out to all of our existing businesses, and we'll be making retention visits sometime between now and the end of the calendar year. I've also met with 2 prospective business people earlier today about relocating enterprises to Saline, and we'll have some very exciting news to share probably in the next month to month and a half regarding a lease that was recently signed for the old Barbecue 52 space in the heart of our downtown. But apart from investing in critical infrastructure, at least from my judgment, business attraction and retention should be the top priority for the waning months of 2023. As it relates to infrastructure issues, you are indeed correct. There have been mishaps, mistakes, oversights in the past, and that served as the primary genesis for City Council adopting a responsible contracting ordinance policy, which we'd be happy to share with you. Some of the issues that you highlight specific to downtown in front of Max were repairs made by utility companies. And unfortunately, per state law, the city has very little leverage over them to complete their work and have them complete their work in a timely manner. But of course, those issues and others relating to business attraction and creating more vibrant downtown or commercial districts, I'd love to chat with you further about. And then, Brian, to your question about Clark Street, I suspect the weather yesterday set us back a little bit, but perhaps somebody from staff can help me. Do we have an anticipation of when Clark will be paved and reopened? I would assume it's sometime in the next week to 15 days.
I would assume that that is correct, too. However, I did not receive any updates about the weather yesterday, so we certainly can get a hold of our city engineer and get back with you on that.
Yep, Brian, at the end of the meeting, I'll give you my card. You shoot me an email, and I'll give you an update by the close of business tomorrow or first thing on Wednesday. Thank you. Yep. If there's nothing further to be brought forward, I do want to underscore a point that Mr. Gearbaugh made. We hear a lot of complaints, suggestions, and thoughts and ideas pertaining to transit, non-motorized pathway, the preservation of green space, and economic development in our community. If you want to have a genuine, tangible impact on any or all of those issues, you should definitely attend our final our master plan town hall open house this Wednesday at 7 p.m. Mr. Harrington will begin the evening with providing a draft of what we are currently proposing, and then we would welcome any additional thoughts and comments before that document goes to Planning Commission and ultimately City Council for review and approval. And that document evidently will help guide decision-making in the city for the next 5 years. So again, if you're interested in any and all those issues, you should definitely attend and encourage your neighbors and friends and coworkers to attend this Wednesday at 7. Please note our upcoming meetings, and if there's nothing else to be brought before Saline City Council this evening, the chair would be delighted to entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:17 p.m. So moved by Gearbaugh. Is there a second? Second. Seconded by Dillon. All those in favor signify. All those in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it. Meeting is adjourned.
All right. So, Mayor, I couldn't